Okay. Now you ruined my entrance because you were way more enthusiastic than I hope at this time of... So, okay, come on, final stretch. Sharing. During a moment of contemplation, during these 2 frantic days, I found myself wondering, why are we here? Why are you here? Sure, the venue is cool and the coffee is kind of great. But I mean, at any given time, and this is news, there were more than 500 of you here, and I also counted 2 babies and 4 dogs. I wonder how the dogs registered. On a serious note, though, why are we here? We are here because we believe what we do is necessary and important. We believe in the notion of the fourth estate, keeping those in power accountable, giving voices to the voiceless. In a way, we are also dogs. We are loyal to democracy, to accountability, and to people. We always return to the story, and we keep digging. Some of us, many of you around this room, do this at the immense expense of their livelihoods, their mental health, or their lives. Murdered, imprisoned, kidnapped, destroyed financially, censored, slandered, doxxed, attacked by trolls and fake news, endured character assassination, mental health peril. There are so many ways they can hurt us. So it's here, and in other places like here, offline or online, in larger groups or smaller, that we become a pack, exactly like dogs, and we fight back. This is what we're here for. And you who define yourselves as journalists, and a lot of the young faces among you that are studying to become journalists, except of those of who will end up in PR, you are watchdogs of democracy. Together in this pack, we are called to safeguard freedom of expression, the right to investigate and publish unencumbered, to do it safely, with dignity, and for decent pay. We understand that these 2 words, freedom and safety, can mean much different things around the world. You have heard in these 2 days a lot about Greece, those of you who are not from here and have traveled from around the world, 35 countries only among our speakers. You have heard a lot, this panel being not last but not least. Now, you know, with the help of experienced, courageous, and awarded journalists and experts from different regions in the globe, we will attempt to talk about the elephant in the increasingly warming room that is our world. Media freedom, media, journalist safety. I want to take a quick moment before I introduce our speakers, who will come on stage and take it one after the other to talk about their experiences and their expertise. To thank the iMEdD team, because this would not be, you know, this is all the iMEdD team, but very particularly one person among them, Stefania Ebrisimova, without whom this would not be possible. So without further ado, I would like to invite on stage Rawan Damen. Rawan Damen is the Director General of Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism. With a career spanning over 25 years, she has produced and directed over 30 hours of documentaries and investigative TV stories, including the award-winning documentary series Al-Nakba. Please.
Good evening. I'm so glad to be here. I'm talking about Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism. I've been the Director General of ARIJ, and this organization has been there for 17 years. We work in all Arab countries, so all in the Arab world: Mauritania, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Sudan, Somalia, Djibouti, Comoros, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Kuwait, Yemen, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Oman, and Saudi Arabia. I'm so glad that I am from this region. I was born in Amman, Jordan, where I live today. because I can publish in Arabic language in Jordan, and then people from Iraq to Morocco can read my content in Arabic language. It's a great privilege. We can reach a very wide audience. Yet, I am from a region known of suppression of freedom of expression and access to information. CPJ, RSF reports can verify this. This is why in ARIJ we support investigative journalists, fact-checkers, and we launched 2 years ago our first pan-Arab whistleblower platform where whistleblowers can leak to us. We have been and learned a lot from our collaborations with ICIJ in Panama, Pandora, Paradise Papers, and all cross-border collaborations. Now we have a strong community of investigative journalists. Soon we will reach the 1,000 investigative journalists we trained who produced investigation, because our model is training by doing. We cannot verify that somebody is trained unless they produce an investigation. And if they produce 2 investigations, we will then call them ARIJian, and they will start calling themselves ARIJian. And we have a community of fact-checkers, around 250 fact-checkers now, under Arab Fact Checkers Network that has more than 38 different initiatives and organizations from more than 11 countries. And we do this through empowerment, training, raising capacity. All our trainings are free, networking, and innovation. We just soft launched our AI strategy for small to medium newsrooms in Arabic language in the region. But every night, I'm so worried about our investigative journalists and fact-checkers and how to get them safe. So with our small team, 20 full-timers and 20 freelancers, we did a comprehensive way of our trial to get them safe through 5 pillars. First is physical safety, where we launched in Arabic language a self-paced course that they should take as a prerequisite. One of our best safety experts, Abdullah Maksour, who's also an IFJ, International Journalism, the Federation for Journalists verified trainer, did it for us. And he himself goes through one-to-one with every journalist, having a risk model, and then the coach, the editor, and the journalist go through this weekly and daily when he or she is in the field. This is especially important in war-zone countries like Palestine, Libya, Yemen, and even Sudan today. Then the digital safety. More and more there are threats. Many of our community have been infected with the Israeli spyware Pegasus. And digital threats are very, very invisible and very dangerous because they affect the journalists, also their families and sources. This is why we have also internally an online self-paced course with 12 modules that they should take as a prerequisite, then a digital safety one-to-one clinic to go through the hardware, software, their computer, their mobiles, before they are starting their investigation work. And this is a clear war that not only us, but all in this room are facing. Legal safety. In every Arab country, the laws are different for defamation, for media law. This is why in every Arab country, if you are an Egyptian investigative journalist, then we connect you with an Egyptian lawyer to go through the story, what we are doing, and then the same lawyer goes through the legal screening of the story before publishing. Of course, you can imagine the quarrels between the editors, the coaches, and the lawyers at the end to publish the stories. Of course, we in ARIJ have also got slab cases where we were successful in them, and there is also one ongoing. And mental safety. Many of the media outlets and organizations, they don't care about mental safety, and if they care after the journalist is traumatized or burnt out. So we decided we will go through this with our journalists before going to the field. So if the journalist is interviewing people tortured from prisons or survivors from harassment or child abuse, they need to go through with our mental safety expert. We also did an online free self-paced course with Dr. Khaled Nasser from Lebanon to go through this before they go to the field. And we added career safety. Many of the organizations who focus on safety, they have only the physical, digital, legal, and mental, but not the career safety. We found out that many of our journalists, especially after COVID, they left their jobs, they were laid off, they became freelancers, and we needed to add career safety where we fix for them their CV, Arabic and English, their LinkedIn, and also put a career path for them. If I am a Yemeni investigative journalist working on climate change, how can I sustain and be in this career? What conference should I go to? Who coaches and mentors? How can I do more stories and how can I sustain myself? Especially now, 40 of our journalists publish in anonymous names, and we are the only region where we have fact checkers working in anonymous name, especially when they fact check politicians. This brings me to my career. I started journalism in Palestine. I studied my undergraduate at Birzeit University, media and sociology, and then I did my postgraduate studies at Leeds University in the UK 20 years ago. I finished my postgraduate study in 2003. And at that time, I had one friend whom I spent all my days with, and that was a Greek friend from Athens here, Stavrola Gotsia. I spent every day with her in the classes and even in grocery shopping. And I didn't see Stavrola. I said goodbye to her in the university dorm, and while she was going down in the elevator, I gave her a small present of friends forever. And then I visited Athens for the first time 13 years later in the year 2016. And I went and visited Stavrola and her husband Peter and spent some time in the living room. Then I went to the kitchen to get a drink, and I found at the kitchen window the same present I gave Stavrola 13 years ago, friends forever. I was so touched. I had even tears in my eyes. And here in this room, I have also very close friends, many. And I will pick out of them one, Yorgos Avriopoulos, whom we worked together several documentaries. Sometimes we spend years not talking to each other, but when we do, it's as if we talked yesterday. I learned from Stavrola and from Yorgos that safety models is not treating our trainees, beneficiaries, students, colleagues. No, we need to treat them all as friends, because only friends are safeguard to each others, and only as friends we can be safe. This is why we in ARIJ have all those ARIJians as real friends, and we care about each other and have solidarity with each other when anything wrong happens. So whenever you needed a connection with an Arab investigative journalist, or you have an Arabic language document or Arabic video that you wonder if it is true or fake, just reach out to us. You can reach me on Twitter. I still use the small bird. I don't like the X. You can direct message me on Twitter. I'm also around with a lot of business cards, of mobile numbers, only Signal, and also email, so you can reach us. We are here to help with anybody who needs something from our region that is very difficult, but we are very proud that we belong to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rawan. Next up, Attila Mong. Those of you who have been here since yesterday have had more chances to hear from him. He is the Europe representative for the Committee to Protect Journalists. He himself an awarded journalist and an author of multiple books out of Hungary, Investigations. He is an awardee of the Pulitzer Memorial Award. And give it up for Attila.
Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Attila Mong. I'm Hungarian originally, and I'm proud to work with CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, which is a New York-based press freedom organization, which already got mentioned. We are working in many, many parts of the world, globally, to help journalists, partly by research, so documenting cases, documenting their challenges, and, of course, advocating with governments, authorities to improve their situation and improve press freedom. One of the reasons I'm in Greece, that in the past couple of days we conducted a so-called press freedom mission to understand better the Greek press freedom situation and also to work with Greek authorities to improve the situation in the country. And we also do safety and emergency work, so we help with safety advice and also emergency help journalists all over the world. I will speak about Europe, and when I speak about Europe, I will narrow my presentation on the European Union and the Western Balkan countries, which I'm responsible for. And just for context, because the main question of my presentation will be whether Europe is could be still considered a safe haven or not, I just wanted to show two important figures, two important numbers from CPJ's research globally. So in 2022, at least 67 journalists were killed, or media workers, and at least 363 journalists were imprisoned. So this is, again, just for context. So shortly after I started working with CPJ, a journalist in Malta was killed. Daphne Caruana Galizia was killed in a car bomb incident, a car bomb attack. And shortly after, another journalist in Slovakia was murdered. And after, within the last couple of years, two more journalists were killed, one in the Netherlands and one here in Greece. So these murders, these killings were wake-up calls for many in the world and also in Europe. Could Europe still be considered as a safe haven? I will, during this presentation, give a lot of arguments why, maybe no, or not anymore, why European journalists still face the same kind of challenges as journalists everywhere in the world. And maybe in the end, I will provide a glimmer of hope, especially for those who come from Europe, to argue that, yes, Europe is, of course, still different. Journalists all over the world face challenges which are probably much harder and much more difficult than journalists in Europe. So the murders of Daphne, Jan, and also, in a way, Peter de Vries and Yorgos Karayvas were all connected to organized crime, in a way. And what connects Daphne's and Jan's murder is that both of them were part of big international investigations, Panama Papers, OCCRP. So both journalists worked on high-level corruption and organized crime. So organized crime is one of the major challenges for journalists in Europe. They threaten their work, they threaten their existence. And yes, Europe is different in many ways, because European authorities and European states in many countries provide a level of security which is unimaginable for journalists living outside the continent. Here is a quote from one of the most well-known Italian crime reporters whom I interviewed a couple of years ago, and she is on 24/7 strict police protection. Bodyguards accompany her to her work, back to home. So what she told me, that the strange thing is that her freedoms were limited or curtailed in a way much more than the people she is investigating. So it's a form of censorship which organized crime managed to impose on her, because basically she could work, she could continue her work in a much more limited way. Her work or her approach to sources is much more limited. So on the one hand, yes, Europe provides a higher level of security for journalists, but on the other hand, this security also limits their freedom. One of the most notorious surveillance cases in Europe was actually Jan Kuciak's case. So before his murder, Jan Kuciak was under physical surveillance. And this again shows that European journalists face the same kind of problems like journalists everywhere in the world. organized crime groups, bad actors, but also, unfortunately, governments use surveillance techniques against journalists. CPJ's report on spyware last year proved that zero-click spyware and new technologies give extra and new ways for these bad actors to surveil journalists, and these spyware seriously hinder their work. It's a harassment, it's a source of harassment, it also endangers the protection of their sources. So in a way, the European Union and European framework, legal framework, doesn't necessarily protect these journalists from surveillance. Hungary was also an example where Hungarian journalists were surveilled with the help of spyware. And what happened is that Hungary is part of the European Union, and the Hungarian legal system gave free access and free way to this kind of spyware. Hungarian authorities investigated the surveillance and found that everything was legal, everything was constitutional, because the legal framework for national security is so loose that it was possible. And let's not forget that physical monitoring is also still a way of surveilling journalists. Hungary and Poland also provides an example of captured markets, where governments take control of media markets, first of all public media, and of course the national regulatory bodies, and also use government-friendly businessmen to basically control the market. So in Hungary, a joint press freedom mission a couple of years ago concluded that there is an unprecedented level of media control in a European country, in a control which evokes countries outside of the European Union. We talked a lot of slaps and abusive lawsuits, and again, Europe has a very developed, well-developed legal system. And in a way, paradoxically, this well-developed legal system gives an opportunity for businessmen, public officials, powerful figures to go after journalists with abusive lawsuits. They use defamation laws, they've used other kinds of infractions, other kinds of laws, or even GDPR, the data protection framework of the European Union. Europe is also a preferred target for libel tourism. So here is a quote from a Serbian investigative journalism platform. She was talking to me about the fact that for days and weeks she doesn't have time basically to pursue her investigations because she has to go to court or she has to prepare documentations for the trials. These slaps cripple their reporting, they drain away resources, time and money from investigations or from the kind of journalism work they could do. Smear campaigns. Populist politicians all over the world, but also in Europe, use tactics to smear journalists. They label them lying press, fake news, but they also label them, in some countries, foreign agents, or accuse them of betraying their own countries. They go on social media, they use this rhetoric to go against journalists, and then this rhetoric encourages members of the general public to use the same kind of rhetoric and smear journalists, so use verbal violence. And verbal violence, we all know, might lead to physical violence. This is an interview, a quote I did with a couple of journalists living in the Netherlands, because let's not forget that gender-based smears are also an important limitations to press freedom. These kind of smears are used against women journalists, and it affects their work. So this journalist was talking to me about the fact that the violence and the smears she received on social media affected her physical life. She got paranoia to go out into the street because she didn't know that whether someone in the street might attack her or not. But also, for example, in Bulgaria, the public prosecutor used rhetoric to accuse investigative journalists who investigated criminal organizations and accused them that they are supporting criminal groups just to discredit their reporting. when the social media atmosphere is toxic, it sometimes or very often spills over to real life. And journalists covering demonstrations, they are in the front line of these attacks. We all know that COVID, this period, provided a lot of opportunities for people to demonstrate, and these demonstrations prove that demonstrators and protesters went against journalists, accused them of false reporting, accused them sometimes of even supporting authorities. So these protests provided an opportunity for them to target journalists, and also police in many countries, in many European countries, sometimes out of incompetence, but sometimes out of deliberate strategy, target journalists. And a new trend, kind of a new trend, of environmental journalists, journalists who cover environmental affairs, who have to be close to sometimes violent demonstrations, are brought to court, and there is a trend of criminalizing their reporting. They are brought to court for trespassing, or they are accused of supporting the protesters, which is, of course, a false accusation, but very many times it leads to their court cases. So let's not forget also that many journalists in the world choose Europe for safety, flee from persecution, and choose Europe to be in an environment which is safer. But very many times it's not something which they can enjoy in Europe. This is a quote from Can Dündar, who lives in Berlin, and he receives daily attacks, daily smears from people in the street who sometimes follow him, make recordings of him, people who sympathize with the regime back in Turkey. So the long arm of the regime which they were fleeing from is within reach for them. So finally, is Europe still a safe haven or not? Yes, so in many ways, of course, in many European countries, press freedom is thriving. In many European countries, government and state authorities actively work on improving press freedom. And also, the European Union has recognized the last couple of years the importance of increasing their work and increasing their commitment to press freedom. So there are recommendations to how to improve press freedom, there are recommendations on how to improve the safety of journalists, and also recommendations and draft directives against slaps. These are very important steps. And also, Europe is preparing the European Media Freedom Act, which all press freedom organizations hope will be robust, and will also provide an example for other countries and for other regions how to move forward with press freedom. So the picture is, of course, not black and white. There are encouraging signs, but I just wanted to point out that in Europe, journalists face the same kind of problems like everywhere in the world, maybe in a better overall political and rule of law environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attila, for the reality check. Next up, I want to welcome on stage Sebnem Arsu. She was the first correspondent of the New York Times in Turkey. Among other media outlets, she has worked for AP and Reuters for more than 20 years. She focuses on politics as well as matters of gender and freedom of expression. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this inspiring event. We, as journalists reporting in our countries, you know, in our small newsrooms or home offices, we lose ourselves in the stories we report, in the issues that we cover, and those issues are not the prettiest issues in the world. So you feel isolated. So being part of organizations like that make you feel as part of a bigger family, so that you basically revive your trust in what you do. It's almost like a therapy. It's like a fresh breath, so thank you very much. As Dimitri kindly introduced, I work out of Turkey, and I am a member of the foreign press community. I am pretty much representing a very niche group of journalists working for foreign press because I'm born in Turkey, raised in Turkey, yet I am in a position to look at Turkey from outside and try to explain it to communities that do not know, sometimes, nothing about Turkey, do not follow the news. So it gives me this unique position, but it doesn't mean that we are exempt of the effects of the media climate in Turkey. So what is happening there? Attila gave a wonderful brief on what's happening in Europe, so let's have a closer look into Turkey. So Turkey is very interesting. Over 20 years it has gone through, massive changes. Those who follow Turkey or the region or the freedoms, liberties, and democracy would remember that early in 2000s, Turkey was hailed as not Turkey, but the pro-Islamic government ruling Turkey at that stage just started to rule the country. The government was hailed as the political force attempting to make changes for better democracy in Turkey. So 20 years later, now the same government is referred or listed as one of the biggest jailers of journalists in the world. So we can talk hours about how that happened, but let's see in terms of numbers where we stand. CPJ lists that, these are meanwhile 2022 numbers. 40 Turkish journalists remain in jail in 2022. According to Turkish Journalists Union, which is TGC, and IPI, there are 21 journalists. According to Reporters Sans Frontières, Reporters Without Borders, 47. So I wanted to put these numbers together because if you are ever covering freedom of expression or media liberties in Turkey, you might be blown by the discrepancy. Here it's simply because each organization has its own ways of defining journalists and media workers. Sometimes if you're working as a clerk, if you're in the administrative office and being arrested or being subjected to any legal procedure, some organization will still list them as journalists or media workers, whereas organizations like TGC, Turkish Journalists Union, and IPI would solely focus on journalists reporting and who have been jailed because of their reporting activities, nothing more. So this is also another reason why the government points at the rights groups and say, look, you guys cannot even decide on the number of the people in jail, so how do you expect us? That's not the point. Even not a single journalist should be in jail, full stop. We're talking in numbers. Each number represents a life. Each number represents an honest person trying to do his work. So as much as we have to stand by with these colleagues who are in jail, as much as we have to do our utmost to expose their stories, we should put equal emphasis on what's going on with the journalists' lives as they practice journalism in Turkey. And there is an alarming downfall in their situation. On the other side of the slide, you would see these numbers. These are, again, collaborated by different statistics by journalism rights groups. 47 of our colleagues have been physically attacked in 2022. And I'm not talking about, slaps. Some have been seriously hospitalized, been in coma, been in intensive care. So we're talking about serious physical attacks. And these are the ones that are taken on the record some of our colleagues wouldn't even report it in order not to be under the spotlight, in order to provide, in order to prevent further reaction, or just to basically protect their families. 43 of them received verbal threats. 32 of them have been arrested. 263 of them were put on trial in 125 criminal proceedings. That is huge. Not only the number is huge, I mean, if you imagine the time and effort and energy you would put as a journalist to prepare a legal file, to appear in court, to sit down with your lawyer, to spare the fund to hire a lawyer if you're not supported by any free services. So it takes away from the time that you should be putting in your journalism that you actually spend in court for nothing. When you look at the charges, when you look at no evidence, sometimes there isn't even no evidence. Sometimes people would be detained and then they will try to prepare the legal basis as to trying to figure out what they can be charged a journalist with. So in terms of detentions, 97 were detained and they spent 1,087 hours in detention. Again, it is basically this cloud of intimidation, this cloud of fear that is being pumped into journalists' lives so that, A, they will be non-functioning because of the fear or because of the proceeding, because of the legal challenges that they fear, but also this is the perception, public perception that the government is trying to create. They're trying to say that critical reporting is a crime. Journalism is a crime. If you're trying to criticize the state, and it's not even criticism, it's basically investigating what's going on. It is pushing for accountability. But there, the idea is if journalism is framed as a crime, then there will be no room for public debate. It is killing the public debate, this cloud of fear. And usually when you look at the charges, you see that 80% of my colleagues being charged with affiliation, aiding, abetting terrorism, while none of them have touched even a weapon, and the only crime that they committed was the reports, the media reports that they have presented. Actually, the terror law in Turkey has also been a burden in Turkey's membership procedures with the European Union. That's one of the reasons why the membership talks have come to a halt, because the European Union demanded Turkey to revise its terror law so that it would not be used to hunt down dissent, to silence opposition, or other purposes. But still we're fighting with this big, I don't know, monstrous definition or non-definition of terror that my colleagues are suffering. So, as I said, this entire criminalization of journalism also reflects itself in the public debate. When I approach people in the street for simple vox pops, simple comments, they say, the brave ones would say, okay, I'm going to speak at the risk of being jailed. So you just say, okay, but it's just an ordinary person commenting on his own life, but it has the fear of being imprisoned because this is the climate of fear that they live in. So how does that happen? In October 2022, exactly a year ago, the government passed a disinformation law that brings 3-year jail term for anyone who spreads content compromising national security in social media outlets. But then who decides for national security? In the first 6 months of 2023, 19 journalists have faced legal persecution because of their comments on social media. So seeing these figures that people say, oh, that journalist, this journalist, ending up in a police station, it reflects on the society. So you have less people talking, less people questioning, less people actually paying attention on what the talk should be. On the other hand, again, last year, Presidential Communications Office decided to issue a disinformation bulletin. And monitoring the issues, and I think they've published around 80 of them, you see that their definition of disinformation is actually critical reporting. So labeling critical reporting as a crime, labeling critical reporting as disinformation, creating this perception of this false perception has effect on journalists as well as the society as well as democracy in Turkey. So what can happen? So we're trying to give hope for future. I think solidarity, being together, exposing these stories. Turkey is not made up of its government. It's also made up of its opposition that needs support from people who believe, who represent universal values. And if we stick together, I believe things can be different in future. Just try to make Turkey and the situation as apparent and as visible as possible. That's my kind request from my colleagues. Thank you.
Hey, more reality checks. Okay, next up, Siddharth Varadarajan, founder of The Wire in India, an award-winning journalist who has gone, him and his medium, in not too little trouble over his investigations, including defamation and being target of Pegasus spyware. Please.
Thank you very much, Dimitri, and to the organizers for inviting me and for including India in the list of countries that we need to hear about when it comes to questions of press freedom. And 10 years ago, if somebody had suggested to me that at a panel like this, at an event like this, the question of press freedom in India would be raised, I would be quite surprised. Because you don't expect an electoral democracy to be in a situation where the RSF, in its listing of press freedom, ranks India 161 out of 180. If you paid attention to the chart that our CPJ colleague put up, number of journalists killed or imprisoned in India was right there in the top 10, below Iran, Turkey, Russia, China. Great company for India to keep. And what I want to do in the next, in the 10 minutes that I have, is to give you an overview about the kind of threats to press freedom and to journalists that exist in India, the different forms they take. And I also want to suggest how one needs to deal with the kind of challenge and threat that we face, because what we are experiencing in India today, I'm afraid, is a sophisticated model of an assault on freedom of the press and on journalistic freedom that is very easily replicable. Some of the elements that we experience in India have perhaps been borrowed from Turkey or Russia or somewhere else, but each and every one of the facets of the attack on press freedom in India that we experience in India today is something that countries which are today democratic and thinking of giving up on their democracy, or the countries that are authoritarian, are likely learning lessons from, and that's alarming. And the rot starts from the top, because you have a prime minister who simply does not have respect for freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. This is a gentleman who, in the 9 years that he's been Prime Minister, has not held a single press conference in India. And the only press conferences that he has taken part in abroad, just 2 of them, where the Indian side insisted that he be asked only one question each, one question for him, one question for whichever foreign president or PM he was visiting. This is a Prime Minister who does not have an official spokesperson in his office to whom journalists can put questions, but who has advisors who send WhatsApp instructions to editors of TV channels, to editors of newspapers, as to what headlines to run, how to spin news in a particular direction. But in terms of the concrete assault, of course, I would begin by listing the physical threat. India is a country where journalists have been killed, assassinated. Not always, the threats typically come from unknown quarters. A very prominent editor, Gauri Lankesh in Karnataka, was killed 4 or 5 years ago by so-called unknown gunmen, but people connected to the Hindu right. And she was targeted because of her vociferous opposition to the politics of Hindu chauvinism. Other journalists have been targeted. Apart from physical threats, online targeting, online harassment is a fact of life for journalists who are critical of the authorities, and particularly if they happen to be women journalists, the targeting can be especially brutal. Another form of attack that journalists have been subjected to, and Dimitris mentioned, is very aggressive surveillance. And in India, The Wire, which I work for, we had 5, we were part of the Pegasus project, which investigated the use of Israeli spyware against ordinary people. And in the list of numbers that we investigated, there were something like 45 journalists. And we found confirmed infections on the phones of at least 5, 2 of whom, one was my own phone, and the other was another colleague at The Wire. And even though the matter was raised in the Supreme Court and the judges ordered an inquiry, but nothing came of it. Lawfare, the use of law to target the media and attack press freedom, is the most common method of attack in India today. And it takes various forms. The filing of criminal charges. Recently, there was a group of reporters, group of editors who traveled to Manipur, which is a state in the eastern part of India, where there's been ethnic strife for the last 3 months. And they went and produced a report looking at media coverage, the local media coverage, and how a lot of that coverage was actually inflammatory and was fueling violence. And because the report was critical of the local state government, which is run by the BJP, which controls the national government, they had a criminal case filed. Now, this is perhaps the first time that I've heard of a situation like this, where the Editors Guild produces a report and has a criminal case filed against them on very serious charges. The law of defamation weaponized against the media. We have at least 3 journalists in India who are currently in jail on terrorism charges. They all happen to be in Jammu and Kashmir. I should mention Fahad Shah. I should mention Sajjad Gul, targeted for the work that they do as reporters, but today in jail under draconian charges for which there is no easy bail to be obtained. Recently, the government of India shut down a website called Kashmirwala, which was perhaps the only independent news platform surviving in Jammu and Kashmir. No official reasons given, it's just that the government issued an order saying that under the Information Technology Act, we have the right to close you down, and the website, now you cannot access it in India. You have an informal travel ban on journalists from Jammu and Kashmir. I know of at least 5 journalists from J&K, Jammu and Kashmir, who were stopped at Delhi airport, stopped while they were trying to fly abroad, including one woman, photojournalist Sana Mattu, who was going to New York as part of the award-winning AP team. She was part of a Pulitzer Prize-winning team, and she was flying there to get an award. But she was stopped at the airport in Delhi and turned back, no reason given. We now hear of the passports of Kashmiri reporters being impounded. You have the repeated use of financial and criminal investigations being launched against news platforms because of critical stories that they do. Earlier this year, the BBC in India had its offices raided by the income tax authorities because they produced a documentary that was critical of Narendra Modi. 2 laws that have recently been introduced are frightening in their scope and dimension. One allows the government to declare any news item as fake news and order the deletion of that news item. Unheard of in a democracy, that you could have the government arrogate to itself that power to declare something as fake. And secondly, the government has the power to order the deletion of content if a so-called reader complains about that content and fails to get a satisfactory response from a website. The government then can review that material and decide in favor of that reader and order the deletion of content. And of course, this ability to direct the deletion of content is being used to put pressure on social media platforms. So it's increasingly common now for Twitter, Facebook to delete tweets, news items, news links that are critical of the government because the government simply says, under our law, these tweets violate national security or any section of the law that they care to cite. And there is, again, no easy appeal process. That's as far as the threats go. And I know it's a gloomy picture. I have a minute and a bit left. Solutions. Number 1, if you are an independent media platform and intend to remain so, make sure that you broad-base your revenue, your sources of revenue, so that you're not dependent on any 1, 2, or even 10 different sources. The more you broad-base, the safer you are. Broad-base, number 2, broad-base your content to dissemination. Do not be overly dependent on social media platforms because authoritarian governments will ensure that those platforms are no longer available to you. So find other ways of distributing your content. Number 3, go to extreme lengths and be extra careful in doing due diligence and fact-checking of the stories that you do, because even minor errors can and will be used against you as a reporter, as independent media, if you are critical of the regime. Number 4, find ways to physically connect with your audience. Beyond what you publish, beyond the videos that you circulate, if you can organize and build a community with your readers and viewers, that connect will be very, very useful when you become the target of a state-inspired attack of some kind or the other. And finally, solidarity. I know this is a word that we've heard often. Other colleagues have mentioned it. But solidarity with other journalists and media platforms in your country when they come under attack, and building links with media around the world. India recently played host to G20, and our government made a huge song and dance about this. And we said, well, if the government can talk of G20, so can we as journalists. So we took the initiative and organized what we called an M20. And we got together editors from as many G20 countries as we could to say, look, press freedom is important. And the G20 leaders cannot pretend to solve the world's problems if they do not pay attention and do not ensure that there is press freedom in their countries. And so we got editors together and we collectively spoke about this and in our own way emphasized the importance of not just our own solidarity when we come under attack, but also collectively raising our voices to make sure that questions of press freedom, questions of journalist safety are put right at the top of the global agenda whenever world leaders meet. Thank you very much.
I don't know what, there's a lot to say after this, but it's a chilling reality. I want to invite on stage Fisayo Soyombo, an investigative journalist out of Nigeria and the founder of the Foundation for Investigative Journalism in the country. His daring work has earned him treacherous parts, and I would like to invite him on stage to talk to us a little bit about it. Fisayo?
Thank you. Thank you. I should have been killed in Nigeria 6 years ago. No, bad math, 7 years ago. I don't know if it would have been execution by hanging or by firing squad. At the time, I'd done an undercover investigation on the plight of Nigerian soldiers who got injured while fighting Boko Haram. And the response of the Nigerian army was to say that I'd committed subversion. The only reason I'm still alive now is that Nigeria runs a democracy and not a military regime. But in military crimes, if you're accused of subversion, the punishment is death. But I'll come back to that. In Nigeria, the press is not free. But I'll start with the lack of freedom of the press by the press. And that's self-censorship. So for lots of newspapers in Nigeria, the funding model that they run depends on patronage from corporate Nigeria and from governments, which means that there are lots of stories that Nigerian papers don't end up publishing. As a matter of fact, I personally think up to 80 to 90% of what is consumed as news in Nigeria is indeed PR. You know, readers, whom I pity a lot, often do not know the extent of PR influence in what they consume as news. This headline, for instance, is not one you can see in a typical Nigerian newspaper. By the way, by way of introduction, I'm an investigative journalist. I do a bit of undercover work, and I run an organization called the Foundation for Investigative Journalism and Social Justice. Two things we do: investigative reporting and social justice reporting. You won't find a headline like this you can do a small search. Nigerian papers don't name banks, don't name corporate organizations that default. We came into the system 2 years ago and said we'll do it. And we ended up shaking the system. You know, banks, for instance, are used to getting away with disappearance of customer funds without anyone holding them to account, without regulatory agencies, without the media holding them to account. But we came in and we saw that by simple reporting, we could, help people get the things that they should get from a functioning society. But it's just like a drop in the ocean, because for so many, they can't report this because they lose adverts, they lose funds. And of course, if the media cannot report stories at will, then that's not what freedom should look like. Another example of someone who had money in the bank, and then she just got debit alerts, and the bank told her, there's nothing we can do, your money is gone. Almost ₦1 million. It took just some social justice reporters saying, we'll put it out for that money to be restored to the customer. The other time I mentioned, so in 2 years, we had one media house help Nigerians recover 46.9 million naira without taking the kobo from them. But we ask ourselves how massive an impact Nigerians would enjoy if they had 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 newspapers who could report like this. But for so many, for reasons of self-censorship, they just cannot. Again, one other way to see how shackled the Nigerian media is just how the government responds to investigative journalism. As I said earlier, 2016, soldiers who got injured fighting Boko Haram did an investigation about them, and funnily, even though the army said I had committed subversion, they afterwards went back to those soldiers and, treated some of them. One particular soldier who had been begging the army, he was shot in the leg, the leg was eventually amputated. He had been begging the army for prosthesis for 44 months. After the story, the army did give him a prosthesis, despite insisting that I had committed, subversion. But the idea of saying one journalist has committed subversion is that hundreds of other Nigerian journalists who are watching get scared and are afraid to touch similar stories. Again, censorship by fear-mongering, just government thinking that we can put fear in the minds of journalists such that we can get away with things they want to report. 2019, I wanted to investigate corruption and malfeasance in Nigeria's criminal justice system. So what I did was I wanted a first-hand account, not third-party information. So what I did, I pretended like I'd committed an offense. I got myself arrested by the police. The police kept me in a cell for 5 nights. After that, they took me to court. I was arraigned in court, and I was remanded in prison. I lived as a Nigerian prison inmate for 8 days. I lost my freedom for 2 weeks and wrote a first-hand account of the problems of the Nigerian criminal justice system. And I thought that I had helped a sensible government, to fix the rot in the prison system. But what the government responded with, was to try to arrest me. The only reason that arrest didn't happen is that it got leaked and there was public outcry, and then the government had to backtrack. Another example, persecution of investigative journalists. My organization had done a story about how the police, embezzled more than ₦1 billion that should have been used to build transit camps in 5 states. So because of Nigeria's security problems, transit camps are important for policemen to live in and immediately respond to troubleshoot crises. So if you steal money that should go into building transit camps, effectively what you've done is that you are indirectly responsible for the death of people who will be attacked and would have no police to respond. Rather than go after those who had stolen the money, what happened was the IGP, sanctioned a move by the police to get us arrested and detained. And of course, actions like this, again, send a message to other journalists, and they feel we'd rather not touch that story because we don't want to end up in police custody. Targeted discrediting of journalists, also rampant in Nigeria, and systematic attack on press freedom. A journalist has done an investigative work, and then those who have been exposed feel that the right way to respond is to make the story unbelievable to the public. Target the credibility of the journalist, target the credibility, of the story. And the unfortunate thing is that when journalists get targeted, other journalists are accomplices. The targeting goes through other newspapers, colleagues. SLAP becoming more rampant. In the last few years, this is new. This is like 3 to 5 years. There's just been a rise in the use of SLAP to attack, journalists. An example of a story my organization did, and nothing but the truth. Then those at the center of it came up and said a ₦1 billion lawsuit. Of course, they know it's not. We don't have ₦1 billion. We're a small newsroom of 20 people. So if you come with a ₦1 billion lawsuit, it means that, if it succeeds, for instance, it's the end of the organization. And it just makes other small newsrooms wonder if they want to attract suits like this. The final point I'm going to make is, how can journalists fight back? Because if there's an attack on our freedom, then we have to respond some way. The good news is that we are responding already. By sitting here in this auditorium, in this forum, talking about press freedom, we are keeping the fire burning. We're keeping the torch alive, and it means that we are not losing the war against our freedom. Other than that, what we can do is to make sure that anytime we get attacked as journalists, we don't give up. If the government comes after us for writing one story that is true, we respond with 5 more. As long as we keep doing the job, the people will continue to benefit from the value of journalism. Thank you.
Keep the fire burning. That's what we're going to do till the end of today, tomorrow, and for the rest of the year. The forum is always a beginning for everything else that stems from iMEdD, so stay with us throughout the year, through our many programs in Greece and around the world, while we present all those opportunities to connect, work together, and fight back. Last but not least, I would like to invite on stage Marcela Turati, who's coming to us. Some of you saw her earlier. She is an investigative journalist in Mexico, doing some of the most gruesome, investigating some of the most gruesome crimes, disappeared people, mass graves. She is the co-founder of Quinto, Elemento. And I would like to welcome you on stage, Marcela, please. Hi.
A Mexican reporter told me how one day he was kidnapped by a drug cartel. He was tortured, injured, and when he was released in a really bad shape, one of his captors warned him, never again publish about the corruption of the mayor of the city. He lived many months with fear. Every time that he had to cover the municipality information, he found one of his torturers. The man worked for the cartel and for the government. My colleague felt safe until the day he knew that this man was found dead. And I have heard many of these stories in my country. Mainly, local journalists threatened and not knowing who to call, who to ask for help, not trusting in authorities, resigned to the fact that death is an occupational hazard. Since the war on drugs was declared in my country in 2006, more than 150 journalists have been murdered and more than 30 disappear. It's one of the deadliest countries for journalists in the world. And Mexican journalists do not die in crossfires or from landmines like they could in a traditional war. In Mexico, journalists are being hunted. The killers gun down reporters in their homes, snipe them as they leave their newsrooms, or blow them away on the street. This is getting used. It's not in the front page in the news anymore. Some journalists that I met were killed. Armando Rodriguez in Ciudad Juárez in 2010. In 2012, Regina Martinez, a correspondent in Veracruz for Proceso, the same magazine where I used to work. Rubén Espinosa, 2 years later, a photographer for the same magazine. 5 years ago, Miroslava Breach, the most important investigative journalist in my hometown. And 2 months later, Javier Valdez. He was my friend, a very well-known journalist. He was from Sinaloa, land of the famous cartel. And he was like our teacher. he teach us how to cover in dangerous regions and to listen to the victims. The day that he dies, we felt like our life stops. On half of the killings, public servants are involved. In some places, government officials are part of organized crime. And when you interview them, you don't know who you are talking to. Both criminals and politicians want to silence the press. In Iguala, for example, the criminals create a WhatsApp group where they give orders to all the journalists of what to publish and what they don't have to publish. Sometimes are the other cartel, sometimes are the militaries who give orders of what can be published. Corruption and impunity is the signature of this tragedy. When we became war correspondents in our own country, soon we understood that we have to do something, that we have to protect ourselves and defend press freedom. So, when Regina was killed, for example, we organized with the students, with other journalists, to travel to protest with the local colleagues who were traumatized, in panic, and help them to clean her grave, to defy the terror. When they killed Gregorio Jimenez, we organized an investigative mission to Veracruz to run an alternative investigation to show to the authorities that impunity is not an option. If you don't do your work, journalists will do. When Miroslava, the brave reporter who wrote about narco-politicians, was killed, we organized an investigative workshop for journalists in her city to show the killers that by silencing one person, others will take her place. That you can kill journalists, but not the truth. And every year in Mexico City, in the street where Rubén was killed with 4 women, Nadia, Alejandra, Mile, and Yesenia, there is an artistic festival to cultivate the memory for this crime and for the victims, to demand justice with music, dance, and poetry. Those are little, powerful, symbolic things that we do in our free time, without our money, but with a lot of solidarity. The most important lessons that we learned in this year is that we do not have to be alone. We have to work in community, in a collaborative way, collectively, and create networks, links, solidarity as a way to reduce our risk and give us support. Even in spite of so much death and grief, Mexico's press has not been killed and is still standing, is still alive. In the places where they silence a respected colleague, that's where you find journalists overcoming their fear to organize and demand justice, to defend the right to inform and be informed, to investigate forbidden subjects, to train others to work collectively for protection. That's what I saw after Armando was murdered in Juarez, and it's been repeated over and over again. Colleagues create collectives, they protest, or we protest, to stop the advancing stain of silence, drawing those areas where people are forcibly and violently deprived of news. Out of tragedy, we have founded collectives defending freedom of expression. Our resistance has helped to establish digital media outlets, support others to establish their own. Some have created trustworthy networks to monitor each other's safety, to use investigative networks to draw attention to those places where there is not respect for life, to shine a light into the areas where things are hidden, silenced, buried. We constantly organize ourselves, even among people from different newsrooms or for different regions, to create networks among reporters, for facilitate the coverage of risky things, to train ourselves in digital, physical, and emotional safety, to continue doing what we have to do, opening space to talk about our own feelings and our own fear, to learn not to block it, to listen it, because the fear many times is telling you to stop, to do not trespass your own limits, and is warning you in a preventive way. Sometimes we investigate and publish together pieces of those who cannot sign the article's byline, who have to be anonymous to preserve their life. In spite of the long, violent years of the drug war, journalism still lives. It suffers layoffs, precarious working conditions, attacks by organized crimes or public officials. We are under surveillance with Pegasus and other malwares. We suffer online harassment, disdain from employers who don't take care of their media employees, but journalism carries on. I truly believe that working in collective as a network saves lives. Community is our main support, make possible to continue investigating, and do not allow us to be distracted from keeping ourselves, our sources, our information safe. I believe in this kind of journalists that put the care at the center. This kind of journalist is taking care of each other, not allowing that other journalists have to be silenced or feeling alone, not allowing that silence grow and capture more regions, because where there is not journalism, where the silence is installed, life is at risk. Life is on a stake. Many people are suffering, and the struggle against silence is a fight for life. Silence is not an option. Thank you.
Please remain with me for a second. Can I have the rest of the speakers? Thank you so much. Thank you. Can I have all of you? Please, Fisayo, you too. Please. This is a small token of the power of community, of sharing, of experience, especially for the younger ones among us. We can't thank you enough. A question, perhaps. Any questions before your drinks? While we walk a little bit to the front, because they're signaling me that, yeah, we're good? Okay. Do you have any questions? This is a precious moment. We have one there.
You all spoke about solidarity, the need of solidarity, and I totally agree. I would like to ask anyone who would like to say who you feel are your best allies in what you do. who do you expect, apart from colleagues and civilians who are at your side? Who else you feel can protect you, can be your ally?
Who'd like to have this one? There we go.
Unfortunately, we suffered like real threats for one of our journalists and found out that the international system of protecting journalism doesn't work. It doesn't work. There are no organizations that really have a full system of protecting you. So unless you are really prepared to go into this, and unfortunately in some cases we had to stop working on an investigation because we cannot protect the journalist. The international system, and I've spoken to CPJ in Washington, RSF, ICIJ, there is no real place where quick relocation can happen or intervene to pressure governments. We still have friends, all of us, who are in prison and we cannot do anything to protect them. So there's a serious problem in this. We don't have an international ally into this. So I always say my mom is my ally to keep going on.
I think, of course, coming closer to Europe, I think you find more protection. Media rights organizations, when they put and foreign missions in countries like Turkey, embassies, consulates, if they can prioritize media freedoms, freedom of expression, and be a parent physically at the courtroom, in protests for media rights and freedoms, that creates at least the visibility of the issue, but also the support behind the issue. And collaborations, I find it so, so important because all these stories that you cannot report in countries like Turkey for reason A, B, C, when it happens in collaboration, it gets out. So when it gets out, the outlets that fear retaliation back home would recirculate that content. So the information will come back, it will recirculate, and that will create the impact that we all desire.
I'll just add that in a place like Nigeria, international alliances help a lot. A journalist called Jones Abiri was picked up some years back, and he was detained by the DSS, that's the security agency in Nigeria, for several months because nobody knew him. He wasn't working for a big platform. He didn't have any international clout. They just felt that he was the kind of person they could keep forever and he would rot in jail. So if you have, like the iMEdD, you have like international organizations coming to back you, speaking for you when in times of trouble, there's the feeling back home that, look, we just have to set this guy free. I also think that, it was discussed at a session yesterday, that funding is so important. Without funds, you can't even show up in court and defend yourself. You can't relocate your journalists out of the country. Just like he said, there are certain stories you want to do. You think that when the story has been done, you need to fly the journalist out of the country immediately, but you just cannot do it. Without funds, there's just so much you can do.
So we hear you, of course, and yes, you are right. It's really a mounting task for international press freedom organizations like us as well. But there are positive examples. We were here in Greece for a full week, several European press freedom organizations conducting a joint mission. We also presented today a report into an uninvestigated and unpunished murder of a Greek journalist 10 years ago, a coalition of CPJ and RSF and Free Press Limited, a Dutch organization. So we work on coalitions, we work on partnerships to make it happen. So our best allies are other similar organizations.
Look, if you're under attack and you're a journalist, your closest ally is your lawyer. And you have to make sure that that's your first line of defense, right? And we have very good lawyers, and if they are pro bono, as they are in our case, all the better. But I cannot minimize the importance of solidarity, right? Now, people may write letters, statements may be issued, editorials may get written, and it may not lead to Fahad Shah being released from prison in India, Siddiq Kapan, who was a journalist who spent over a year on terrorism charges even before he got to do a story. He was arrested by the police and held for a year on these trumped-up charges. But the fact that people out there are speaking about his case and statements are being issued and the matter is being raised around the world, I think counts a great deal in boosting the morale of the targeted person and those who are around them, even if they don't immediately generate relief. So I think that this coalition, alliance, solidarity in defense of press freedom is absolutely crucial.
Thank you. I think the solidarity is among colleagues, but and we have not a protection or not a tie with citizens, with the public that we inform, and that we have to create this collaboration because we do all this alone, and the same people always, doing this. But the NGOs help, many NGOs, but the problem is that many times they act when some journalists are on risk and they extract and take away these journalists and they have to live outside, they have to be exiled for the rest of their lives or many years. And we lose the most, in many places, the most important investigative journalists. And they are living in the United States, selling hot dogs or trying to do whatever they can because there is not a plan for them for continue working. And also at the same time, you silence the region when this journalist was covering, So we have to think all these things. Also for me, the feminists and the female human rights defenders, they have helped many times to me. They saved my life many times. Also believe the international mechanisms don't work. Last year, I was in Vienna in the United Nations 10 years anniversary of the 10 years of the mechanisms to finish the impunity against journalists. And I feel like really hopeless because they give you cookies with chalecos antibalas, the bulletproof sign logo, and they did like a performance of how Daphne Caruana was killed, and that we have to feel like everything, like the bombs and all the lights in the salon. And also they present us a video of UNESCO of how a hitman killed a journalist, and in the restaurant all the people was eating a hamburger, and nobody do nothing, and really graphic thing. And I was like, come on, like we are journalists traumatized because we see this and we live this. And they did these things, and they didn't allow the NGOs to talk, and the presenters were on Zoom because they didn't travel. They didn't travel to the conference. So I was like, come on, they just want us to check, to do the checklist that they do something, and we need to establish houses where journalists can create, can rest, can reconnect with themselves. In the Basque Country, for example, there are a community to pay for their own money to bring journalists or human rights defenders. I think that we have to create this kind of solidarity also, and to push the government to don't do business with the countries where these things happen.
Thank you so much, all. We won't be taking any more questions because you will be able to meet the speakers right outside. Just 2 more pieces of information before you go. There are 2 amazing guiding tours starting right now. One of passengers, the photo exhibition of César Desfoulis, which was a World Press Photo winner this year. And right outside, the shortlisted stories of the European Cartoon Award. Don't miss those. People are expecting you to show you and amaze you. Thank you so, so much. Give out a final applause, please.